So, after getting the second dose, um, is an individual able to be infected by SARS-CoV-2 and therefore transmit to others that are not vaccinated yet?
You mean even is your question even after someone gets vaccinated gets the flu? Is it possible they could still be infected? Is that a question?
Correct.
The data on this are not 100% ready yet. So all the trials that you've seen with those phase 3 trials that prove the efficacy and the safety of the vaccine. And when people talk about 92% or 91% efficacy of those two vaccines, right? Moderna is actually about 95%. What they're talking about is the ability of the vaccine to prevent severe disease, right? That did not look for they haven't studied yet if people are getting infected with the virus, right? Because these are two different things. You can get infected with the virus, but because you've been vaccinated now, you are ready to prevent the virus from spreading and causing disease, right? So these are two different things. The most important thing is, do you prevent disease? And if we prevent disease then and prevent the virus from disseminating, then you're less likely to transmit it yourself, right? But those studies are still coming. There was a study, you might have seen it a couple of days earlier, about the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, the UK one, and it showed that there was a significant reduction in the transmissibility, right, or the infectious rate. So not as good as preventing the illness itself, but it still reduced transmission, which is good.
I see.
That's what we're hoping for, right? But these are two different things. But that's why you would still kind of have to maintain the same measures we're doing now, even if you're vaccinated. You don't know if you can still potentially transmit it, or you can potentially you're still infectious, right? But the most important thing is you very less, not likely to get sick out of it. That's right.
Right. I understand now. So many were wondering if there are any side effects that they could potentially be worried about upon receiving the vaccination.
Well, just the standard side effects from all vaccines. Most of us, I hope all of us, had been vaccinated throughout our life, right? And some vaccines give you more of a side effect, and those side effects, they include at the injection site, that pain because it goes in the muscle, right? So that muscle pain, you're causing inflammation. If there's no inflammation, if there's no immune response, then the vaccine did not work. That's not good, right? If the vaccine works, again, you're not really infected. All what they gave you is that protein, and now you're making an immune response. The immune system does not know that this is not a real virus. The immune system does not know that this piece of protein you got is not going to cause disease. It doesn't know. All it knows is that we saw something foreign, so we got to fight it, right? So it makes the exact same reaction it would against the real virus.
I see.
The only important thing is there's no disease. So, but there are these side effects, right? So you get and that varies by patients, right? So that pain level might vary. You get some swelling, redness. You also might get some general tiredness, some fever. Some people are reporting a little bit of fever, right? But they're all nothing, I understand some people might not like that, but that's fine, right? That's a small price to pay for the obviously being protected from this and getting rid of this entire pandemic, right? But nothing that would be any serious thing. The only potential that's been reported, but it's can't remember the numbers. Something 1 in 100,000 or something. People are having allergic reactions, but again, to the disease. So they're having some sort of a allergic reaction. They're getting like that's the same thing that some people who have an allergy to eggs or shellfish or peanuts or something, and then they would make an allergic reaction. So those people who would know, they might have allergic reactions against other vaccines. So they should be careful. And if they see any symptoms that are clearly, they're getting swelling in their face, and that's not normal, right? So they would go get a prednisone shot or cortisone shot, and then that will shut down, that would take care of it. But it's very rare. But that's, it's happening, and we see it now more in the news because there's never been that number of people vaccinated in that short time. Right now, millions of people are getting vaccinated. So of course you get, generally, you get vaccinated maybe 100,000 people a year. Let's say, I don't know, for certain for a certain vaccine that's not getting that media attention. So people don't talk about it now. People are looking out for any kind of weird things, and that's why it gets a little bit of attention.
That's a good point. I actually never thought about the time period and just the fact
Yeah,
that
it's all compressed, right? So you get,
and the fact that information can now travel so easily. So
yes,
regarding vaccination, nothing's really changed. It's just it's like in our faces much more
exactly.
now.
Yeah, that's like akin. Well, let's ban eggs and peanuts and shellfish from the entire from the grocery store, because what if someone eats it and gets an allergic reaction? Right?
Makes perfect sense. I was personally curious in terms of the administration of the vaccines. Why do we require 2 doses, and why is there a gap of 21 days for the Pfizer and 28 days for the Moderna to get the second dose?
Yeah, so I mean, if you might remember this from the immunology course. So in the way the immune response works is the first time you are introduced to a pathogen, and in this case, the vaccine. Remember, we're trying to mimic the same kind of thing that happens when you have an infection, right? The first time is called priming. This is when we have these sentinel cells, the resident cells in our tissues that live everywhere, including in the muscle where the injection will happen with the vaccine.
Right.
They were the one that we're gonna intake that mRNA, right, vaccine, and then they will make the protein, and that protein will now be produced locally at the site of injection, right? That doesn't induces that inflammatory response, that initial inflammation, kind of like when you cut your fingernail, you cut yourself with a nail, and then it really swells and hurts and whatever, or that's the inflammatory reaction. That will not give you long-term protection. That does not give you memory where it protects you from future infection. What happens then is those cells will take it to those adaptive or specialized immune cells that live in concentrated regions of immune system in our body, what we call them lymph nodes and secondary lymphoid organs, but it doesn't matter. So that's where all these, if you want, powerful immune cells reside and waiting for a pathogen to be brought to them. In this case, the vaccine, the protein, that spike protein will be brought to them and prime them, so activate them for the first time, right? So that takes time, and that initial activation will provide some protection, but it's not, and they will make some antibodies, and they will activate some of those immune cells, right? So if you're infected after that first time, you will be better off than someone who has never been vaccinated, but not fully protected, right? You need a second, what we call a secondary a secondary immune response. So a second dose now would go again, and those cells now have been already activated. They've already seen that protein. So they would have built a small army of these cells that have learned how to fight this protein, how to make antibodies against this protein. And now when they actually see it a second time, now that army will grow, and the amount of antibodies they will make gets better, gets even better at protecting and preventing the infection if you get infected again. The timing, what you asked, 21 days versus 28 days, that has been determined in the lab, right? Sometimes that what we call prime boost. Prime is the first time you get the vaccine. Boost is the second time. That period, and they test, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, they do all these kind of tests in the lab, and they find, different, depending on the vaccine itself, they find, one vaccine found that 21 days is the best. It gives you the best response, and one found 28 days. It really varies by vaccines, but it's somewhere around that, not that much. You would never see like prime boost 6 months apart, right? Or like 2 days apart as well, right? So it's generally in that 2 to 3, 4 weeks period.
Yeah, I see. So it's definitely important to keep in mind to get that second dose. And
correct. They would definitely make sure when you go get your vaccine to tell you have to come back. I mean, if I'm sure, a couple of days difference would make a big difference. But it's best to follow the timeline. Why not get the best immune protection if you can, right?
Right.
That's the whole point you're doing this.
Yeah. And very interestingly, I was very curious why is the Pfizer vaccine kept at about -80 to 60 Celsius, while the Moderna vaccine is fine at regular refrigerated conditions?
Well, I wouldn't say regular refrigerated condition for the Moderna. It's actually -20. So like your regular freezer. The minus 80, correct. The Pfizer vaccine needs that minus 80, which is that deep freezer that is very specialized, right? So we have one in the lab, and it costs a lot of money, right? That we keep. It's normal to keep. So when we make RNA in the lab, we keep it at minus 80 because you really kind of, if you freeze it down at that temperature, it now is protected from. Remember, I told you that this RNA, this vaccine is very fragile, right? So if you put it at the wrong temperature, it starts degrading. Even with that protection, it's not fully protected. Now the difference, again, that was determined in the lab. They would test it. Pfizer would have loved if their vaccine would survive at minus 20 or 4 degrees versus the others, right? Both of them did not want. There are other companies that have also done mRNA vaccines which have not been approved yet, so I'm not going to talk about them. But they have added things to their vaccine to make it be able to withstand normal temperatures, right? But when the more you add more things, then people start worrying about that, right? So the Pfizer and Moderna did not, and it's probably the most likely reason is that, as I told you, they put it in that lipid nanoparticle to kind of give it a little shell to protect it and allow it to enter into the cell. That lipid nanoparticle is different between the Pfizer and the Moderna, and the composition maybe for the Moderna made it a little bit more heat stable, so it give it a little bit more stability, so it doesn't need minus 80, minus 20 is enough. And versus Pfizer needed that minus 80, right? So they do the studies and they find that minus 20, it's less stable. So that's how they determine this.
Cool.